My spouse deceived me throughout this marriage, and she is now avoiding confronting it. She was everything I wished for. Smart, ambitious, and had a dash of humor that made everything better. She was my wife Jessica for a decade, and I never questioned a thing, because she was alluding to this perfect life we were living with a cordial future. The marriage was strong, the plans were there, and the relationship seemed based on trust and love. Attaining our first home felt like a dream, coming to reality, but that was just an illusion because after all, trust gets shattered when you realize that you have been constantly deceived. As much as I wish to say my best friend was supportive all throughout, she wasn't. A marriage that was supposed to be all about cherishing one another turned into wanting to take control. Everything was a contest, and when we did finally attend college and graduated, things just ended up getting worse. Proposing after scrambling to attain a career seemed like a pretty decent idea, especially when we had the perfect wedding, but it was nothing short of falling to ground zero. And yet, there were certain details that always nagged me in the back of my mind. Like those times she would shun personal inquiries, or her attempts to deflect questions about her upbringing. I convinced myself that it was simply a matter of decorum. Everyone has skeletons in their closets, right? I tried to believe the mysteries that she shut away held no significance and were not revelations which could have drastic impacts on our lives. I was wrong. Rather, frighteningly, they were about to unravel my life. If you are not following our channel, you may never see it again. Nonetheless, if you have subscribed, kudos. You will forever have access to the best of the content whenever you feel like watching and listening. The first crack emerged on our 10th anniversary. My wife and I had deeply planned to celebrate with a winter vacation in the mountains, and everything was looking perfect, until it wasn't. While we were enjoying the warmth of the fireplace with a glass of wine, Jessica received a call. She looked at the incoming call screen, declined the call, and started looking sick. I was not concerned too much. Then, when her phone buzzed yet again, I started to feel a little worried. She appeared to be trembling and turned her phone off. I called out to her and asked whether she was all right. Jessica provided me with a forced smile and responded with, "Yes, let us not forget about the difficult work situation at hand," and stated work needs her support. At this point, I felt that something was regarding with my Jessica, but decided not to probe further. After all, our anniversary was to be filled with joy and excitement, and not stressors like work. Well, unfortunately, that did not happen. Instead, the deputy mayor of our township was greeted by sudden internal turmoil, replacing the warm evening instead for a less intimate one. After some time, I started piecing things together. From mysterious phone calls that are always acted upon in private, to unexplained long distances and rude absences. Each of these had been a warning, but I was simply choosing to ignore them. It was becoming quite the issue and rather pressing, as every time I would try to confront her, she would brush the issue under the carpet, claiming everything is all right. That wasn't truthfully the case, however. My wife had been hiding information from me, and now I wished to uncover what the truth was. One evening, I observed her phone vibrating on the side table while Jessica showered. Recently, it looked like she had developed some form of phone paranoia, as she never left the phone out of sight. As I retrieved the device, I let out a sigh as my heart began racing at a furious rate. I absolutely despised the notion of touching her phone as it came off extremely intrusive, and yet, I had to delve deeper into this mystery. My curiosity was taking a toll on me, and so was the lack of information I had. I accessed the phone by inputting a password that I was deeply familiar with, and transitioned to the messages portion of her phone. I felt twitches of anxiety as I searched for texts, wishing to explain the drastic alteration in our marital relations. Then, I got something. "We need to talk. You can't keep hiding this forever," was the last text sent from an unknown number. I was in complete shock. I felt as if I had no life running through me as my blood ran cold. I read the messages before me, and with shocking realization, I knew they teetered far above my grasp of comprehension. The messages spoke about dealing with accounts, hidden debates, names, and so much more. With every message I read, my anxiety coined a new term to alarm me. There were more lies and a deeper web of deceit. It was then that I noticed my ex-wife's late work messages. One message, in particular, felt unusual. "I'm tired of living this double life. I need to tell him the truth." I couldn't wrap my head around it. More so, I was scared. The most poignant detail was that this broadcast was wrapped around a week ago, sent at night during her supposed work shift. I just had one horrible, dominating question. Just what kind of terrible lie was she leading alongside my worst lover to fuel her insatiable thirst for betrayal? Deep down, I knew that those were troubling messages and decided that questioning my ex-wife would allow me to discover the truth. Who is this? I confronted while showcasing her the messages to cope with my anger. In an instant, her pupils dilated and jaws dropped like they went into a freezer. I couldn't help but pinpoint that she looked more terrified than apologetic. Yet, it's none of your business. She spoke while pacing in circles, deflecting questions in utter defiance, as if I was not even standing there. None of my business? I yelled, aghast. You are my wife. How can you claim this doesn't concern me? You have been deceiving me. You have been deceiving me. She just remained quiet and looked at me with eyes I had never seen before. There was anger, maybe fear, and a very subtle but ordinary hint of guilt. That night, Jessica didn't say anything. She locked herself in the guest bedroom, leaving me to grapple alone with the disaster of our shared life. With the painful and sad reality sinking in, I found myself grappling with the fact that the woman I had married now felt like a complete stranger. How can I not see the things she was hiding all these years? What was she concealing all this time? For the following few days, she remained distant. She offered vague and unconvincing excuses of work and the need for space. I, however, was not ready to drop it. So I began doing my own research, going through documents, bank statements, anything that could shed light on her secret life. The results were, to say the least, shocking. Saya had set up a number of bank accounts under different names. Unknown parties had received payments, large sums had vanished, and transfers and withdrawals were a mess. It seemed like she had built her own independent multi-level financial system. Then, there was the property deed. It was in another folder I found in her office, a folder that was very neatly organized. The folder contained a house deed to a different state that was purchased 2 years into the marriage. On the deed, the name listed was one that I had never heard of before. It turns out that I was living together with a stranger, a woman whose lies were so delicate and complex. All I felt was confused, like I was in a nightmare that I could not wake from. This time when I presented her with the evidence, she had no other option but to break down. She was sobbing, unable to continue the facade. Why, Jessica? I asked, shaking with fury and pain. Why did you lie to me? What is all of this? She started crying more, tears cascading down her cheeks. I never wanted it to come this far, she faintly said. I was already in trouble before we met. I thought I could resolve it, but it only got worse. And then, I could not stop lying. In trouble? I repeated as I began to feel the ground disintegrate beneath me. What do you mean trouble? She seemed to hesitate, as if searching for the right words. Debt, she stated after some time. Debt and things I cannot talk about. Things you cannot talk about? I yelled. We have been married for 10 years, and you are telling me there is a huge portion of your life that you cannot discuss? You forced me to believe in something that was not real. She sobbed uncontrollably this time, her cries shaking her entire body. I did not know how to tell you, she cried. I was terrified of losing you. I thought if you knew the truth, you would leave me. You have already lost me, I said firmly, beginning to distance myself from her. The moment you decided to construct our marriage on a web of lies, you lost me. Jessica left the very next day. I asked her to leave, giving her space so that I could gather myself. She did not put up a fight. With nothing but a suitcase, she left with an empty assurance saying that she would one day clarify everything. But at that moment, I was unsure if I would want to listen to her. The harm was already present. The life she had built along with us, alongside our marriage, had been a complete lie. Considering the intricacies of her life, I decided to start digging deeper. I hired a private investigator to see the extent of the web she had woven. What he uncovered came as an even bigger surprise to me. Jessica, in the most truthful sense, was leading a double life. The house she owned in a different state was not just a financial stashing. It was actually her other persona. She had a different name, a different set of friends, and a different job. It appeared as if she had built an entire parallel life outside of the marriage. The investigator found out that Jessica had been associated with some troublesome financial matters dating well before our first encounter. As she stated, she had debts, but those were not your average debts. She owed money to shadowy figures and organizations, very dangerous individuals who had been after her for years. When we got married, she was not only in love with me but also wanted to escape from that life and build a new facade of normalcy to shroud her past. The magnitude of the betrayal rattled my brain. I loved her. I wouldn't dare question my trust in her for a second, while in truth, I was building my life with a woman completely different to what she claimed to be. It felt as though every single memory, every second we had spent together was stained with her deceit. In light of all this new information, I loaded the documents to divorce her. There was no way to save our marriage, not after everything. Quite frankly, I could never remain within a relationship where trust had been so utterly obliterated. Her manner was crude and lantern-like one night on the outer highway when she had vanished without a trace. Should have made some concession to untangle the talk show mess she left for me, but alas, I never could focus on anything else. I was never able to understand loan deck ending from the plane of life. No one was able to reach to her. The family, the lawyers, even the private investigator. She was completely traceless. In the crux of it, not even a shred of proof remained, but she was bound by Smetha's contract, a void that has never been promised unto this world. From her perspective, I was at a new low of desire and joy. I worked on and built an understanding towards who I was in the dystatic worlds of where I worked head in hand. The betrayal and lies cost a significant amount of trust and debts which had built it up towards Jessica's name. This lie made me whipped away from my friends and family. Their support matrices could not begin to relieve me of the feelings that this whole situation had birthed. I remained devoid of feeling towards everything. I started to abhor my entire life. The split-up came to a screeching halt, not because of me but because of her vanishing. I situated myself in borrowed wings. The anger from feeling affiliated to someone who made a mockery out of my life for a decade went in my body and animated myself. Nothing more to think about. She was the all-put loving, worrying figure for my life. My parents were not crayons and devoid of imagination where I had to deal with remanenting. I was framed, and for the rest of my life I was. With time, I learned to let go. I no longer sought answers to questions that would bring more anguish. Moreover, I chose not to delve deeper in wondering what motivated her to lead a double life and losing myself in contemplating the authenticity of our marriage. I accepted that I may never be provided with the closure I had hoped for. The woman I had loved so dearly had also faded alongside the memories, if those memories ever existed in the first place. What I am left with are tough lessons on morality and the extent of treachery people are capable of committing. Step by step, I started the process of reconstruction. I slowly began to build old friendships, pick up new hobbies, and give life to a fresh new purpose. This time, I made the conscious decision to be more cautious with trusting others, close relatives included. Although Jessica's lies were painful and did manage to demolish my house of cards, they did not manage to shatter me. I was still standing. I was still here. That was enough for me. My wife took massive loans under my name, and now I am indebted. I had been married to Scarlett for a decade. We first met in college, and right from the start, we clicked. There were conversations full of aspirations where we planned for the future we would build together. Just like all marriages, ours had its hurdles, but I always remained hopeful. She was my wife, a friend, and the person whom I could trust the most. I was under the impression that we were content. We had a beautiful house, 2 wonderful kids, and what looked like a reasonably placed budget. I had a good position as an engineering, which meant a good income that provided us with a good standard of living. While Scarlett had the bigger role in handling household duties such as bill payments, I did not follow her actions strictly, rather trusted her to act on our best interests. That trust was destroyed one morning where I received a concerning phone call from a collection agency. The voice of the man on the other side sounded professional and matter-of-fact when he spoke. "Mr. Davis, I am calling from collections and wanted to speak to you about your unpaid bills. You now owe a total of $250,000. I felt as if I had been blindsided. "I don't believe I am the person you are looking for," I said, confused. "I do not owe any money to anyone." The other person on the line was silent. "Mr. Davis, our records show that there are several loans attributed to your name. For the past 6 months, there has been a letter in your mailbox at your house that has remained unaddressed." My heart started to race. Were the letters addressed to me? Either way, I haven't seen any notices. Shakily, I hung up the phone and started looking for Scarlett. She was in the kitchen, busy prepping breakfast for the kids. Her face looked calm. My apprehension turned into anger as I confronted her. "Scarlett, I got off a call with a collections agency, and they claim that we owe $250,000. Why is this the first time I am hearing about this?" Scarlett became pale in an instant, and I worried that she would faint. She was blinking her eyes widely, unable to meet my gaze. I don't know what you're talking about." Yet I knew that deep down she was telling a fabricated story. We highly urge everyone to subscribe, as otherwise, you will be missing out on spectacular stories that we cover and which are available at your convenience. If you are already subscribed, congratulations. You will never miss on know the kind of stories that we cover. We have a lot in store for you. That is how I learned the story of the rest of the loan, the rest of my financial life. I kept going with this thought until late at night, when once again I reminded myself about the very envelope I found that night. In my wife Scarlett's home office, I came across an assortment of drawers where a great deal of envelopes sat. Between them, I spotted many unopened ones which contained letters from differing lenders, all of which appealed for communication as they were offering very dubious services like loans and credit cards prepaid in my name. I was borderline floored. If at any point I had reason to believe I was dealing with an overwhelming debt threshold, the last piece of correspondence confirmed it was something far more sinister. And while all those letters and envelopes were coming through the mail slot, each belt line revealed the sickening consequence for default on the numerous bordering debt contracts placed against my name. Scarlett is what caused those crippling, financially derailing loans to be borrowed: various credit cards, a second mortgage, shadow loans, personal loans, unsecured loans, student loans. Everything was issued in my name, and turns out they've shifted to default status. It was not until the last confrontation that she decided to tell the truth. Letting out sobs, she murmured, "I'm sorry," while hiding her face in her palms. I really did think I could fix the issue before it got out of hand, but obviously, I was wrong. "Fix it?" I yelled, in disbelief as a mix of fury and incredulity washed over me. "You have put us into debt of $250,000. Explain, please." She lifted her head and looked me in the eye, in a way that one would do with a wounded animal. "There's being bloodshot. It started with small things," she said. "I went over budget with a few things here and there, and then everything took a turn for the worse. I overestimated my capacity to manage loans, and I was sorely mistaken. You took it all out without my permission," spoke I, feeling as though the person in front of me was a complete stranger. "You got my signature without my consent, and for what purpose? Lying to me at tins every day, and you think that is okay?" All she could do was nod as she neglected looking at me. "I really had no alternative option," she said, almost inaudibly. "I was terrified you would leave if the truth came to light. Trust me when I say I have thought about that option time and time again," I said, my tone remaining chilling. "You have decimated every financial construct we built together. You have lied to me, and everything we worked for is at stake." The following few days disheveled me. Panic, anger, and disbelief became all-consuming notions for me. Because of everything Scarlett had built, I was forced to take a leave from work to sort out the financial crisis. Hours were spent on calls with creditors who I believed knew how much debt was now drowning us. My lawyer advised that since Scarlett and I were married, and the loans were in my name, I was completely liable to the debt. I could potentially press charges for identity theft and fraud, but I would have to drag Scarlett down the legal system alongside me, and that is something I would never want to do in order to keep my family intact. I felt like I was in a box. The most horrendous way I had been betrayed was by Scarlett, but forcing her into a legal battle was a notion that repulsed me. There were our children to think about as well. They were too young to understand what was going on in detail, and the last thing I wanted to do was disrupt their lives further. Each night, I would remain awake staring at the roof, burdened by the gravity of Scarlett's actions. The trust that took a decade to build has been seething into anger and immense grief. The one woman I loved and the mother to my children. How could she do this to us? Scarlett did try to reconcile her way. She suggested a job that would help her contribute to the family's debt. It was, however, a case of too little, too late. The betrayal I initially faced could remain unchanged, irrespective of her efforts. Therapy sessions included a counselor, but neither did the therapist appear to have a fix to the puzzle of lie after lie. Both tears and rage were captured during our therapy sessions alongside endless repetitive apologies. Apologizing became like Scarlett striking me in the face. Sorry was simply not enough. It's impossible to undo the loans, remove the sleepless nights, and reconstruct the obliterated trust. This slowly made me realize that I needed to make a decision. I could either continue to live in rage while permitting Scarlett's actions to fully destroy my life, or get a grip on things and figure out how to get us out of this financial mess. I settled on the latter option. There was no way I was going to let her mistakes define my life. For once, I was going to stand up for myself and think about the mental impact her actions and obligations could have on me and our children. To begin with, I sought an appointment with an insolvency practitioner. Together, we designed a strategy on how to tackle the significant amount of debt. Although I knew it was going to take a considerable amount of time and difficult choices to resolve this issue, it was the only step that could put me ahead of the curve. Where possible, we merged the loans, arranged with the lenders for reduced interest rates, and implemented a stringent budget that virtually eliminated every one of our luxury expenditures. We sold our spare vehicle, put our subscriptions on hold, and made the decision to sell our house in order to buy a cheaper one. While difficulties were great, it was indeed motivating. Scarlett accepted a job offer, and her part-time job would help us with household finances. However, I made it very clear that she would not have any control of the finances whatsoever. I decided to personally take control of all the finances and tracked every single dollar that came in and out. It was tiresome, but I needed to make sure the situation that had previously occurred would not happen again. I also took legal steps to protect myself. I consulted a lawyer to prepare a post-nuptial agreement that would financially protect me from any action Scarlett might undertake. Without any objection, she signed it, realizing that this was a prerequisite for our cohabitation. This was another reminder of how deep my wife controlled me, leaving me needing legal protection against her. What were once months gradually turned to a year, and we were continuously making strides. The debt was still there haunting us, but we were steadily outdoing ourselves. The financial advisor would reach out occasionally to make sure everything was going smoothly, and for the first time in what seemed like forever, I could finally see the light at the end of the tunnel. However, the case of our marriage is different. The counselor we had been working with was trying everything in her power to help us piece together our relationship, but it was akin to trying to mend a broken vase. The cracks were too manifold and too deep. I still loved Scarlett, but that love had been tarnished with betrayal and resentment. I often found myself wondering about everything else in our history, like how long did she stay quiet or how many lies were there. I could no longer view her the same as I did before. With her smiling or attempting to grab my hand, I would feel a sense of anger and distrust. On the other hand, Scarlett seemed to have some genuine sense of regret. She did show up to every counseling session, along with adhering to the budget and working hard to fix things. Although her efforts were commendable, they ultimately felt devoid of appreciation to me. The reality is that no amount of effort from her side can change the damage we had both suffered or the effort of putting us into this situation. Our residence, which was once soaked in joy and laughter, now appeared devoid of any life and full of tension. Communication was largely reduced to mundane issues, finances, children, and chores around the house. There were no dreams to share and no plans to look forward to. We were merely dragging ourselves through each day, trying to survive the chaos we found ourselves in. One night after putting the kids to sleep, I found Scarlett sitting in front of me at the kitchen table. She looked sad and utterly exhausted. "I know you hate me," she spoke softly. "I know I have obliterated everything there is to value." I stared at her, unsure about what to say. There was a part of me that felt like screaming, "You are absolutely correct," but I opted not to. The other side of me simply felt exhausted. I was weary of always feeling angry, weary of the constant sensation of betrayal, and completely tired of this horrible life we found ourselves in. "I don't hate you," I spoke, my voice flat as I struggled to summon a feeling. "But trusting you again is something I am not sure of." She nodded, tears brewing in her eyes. "I know, and it is perfectly fine if you want to leave. I wouldn't blame you." I ran my fingers through my hair as I sighed. "It's not that simple. There are kids involved, as well as a whole life." "I know," she whispered. "But maybe it is time we both faced the fact that we no longer love each other and that we chose to stay together out of certain obligation." A punch to the gut would have better than what I felt in that moment. Her words were full of truth. We were not choosing love. We were choosing a specifically blurred boundary of our marriage through the lenses of duty towards our children and the life we once wished for. "I need time," I said, choking. "I need to decide what I want. What is best for us all." After careful consideration, I knew the decision to take a break from Scarlett was going to be hard. It wasn't easy, but I knew healing required me to separate myself for the betrayal. I found it helpful to know that we had come to an arrangement where both of us kept custody of the children, and we were able to parent without fighting to our best ability. Our separation was devoid of hostility, as devoid as it could be considering the nuance. We kept paying off the debt to each other whilst Scarlett staying living in her small apartment near me. Respectfully, we still cared for and wanted a stable environment for our kids away from the chaos that surrounded everything else. In the following months, a sense of stability returned which I had longed for a long time, which helped me move on. The anger turned into focus on growing and healing. I shifted my attention to my work and started enhancing my social relationships and making friends. Most notably, the all-consuming debt that governed my life ceased to define my future, and everything turned into an opportunity. Scarlett and I kept a civil communication with each other regarding children and finances. Eventually, we reduced the hostility we had towards one another and reached a point where we could live together amicably. I noticed her working and paying off the debt, which showed me that she was quite remorseful for her actions. Regardless of her showing signs of regret, our marriage had certainly become irreparable. Ultimately, losing the battle almost cost us our marriage along with the life we once lived together, but it helped me understand the significance of trust and communication in a relationship. Losing the debt battle was tough, but as time passed, I gradually appreciated it more and more. The experience scarred us both, but it taught us valuable lessons about responsibility and deceit. For the most part, however, we moved on as best as we could and actively co-parented our children, making sure they received the love and support they required. What I discovered was that love can easily be shattered due to betrayal, but it can just as easily serve as a motivation for change. I began the process of reclaiming my life, little by little, and uncovered a new way forward. A way that was not indicated by the errors of the past, but rather by the power to rise above them.